There is a fine line in the sport of MMA between respect and hype. Of course, the more people you can get interested in your fight, chances are the more money you're going to be able to make. But the sport itself has been built upon the very ideals of traditional martial arts and mutual respect, which usually comes from all combat sports, really. Now, there's plenty of ways fighters cross that line and go so far as to completely disrespect and even taunt their opponent. We've seen it happen at weigh-ins, pre-fight stare downs, and even during the fight itself. Now, I think most people would agree that it's a pretty disrespectful thing to do, but when the person doing the taunting gets knocked out, not only is it cosmic karma at its finest, but it's also something worth watching in a YouTube video. Alright everyone, cold turkey might be great on sandwiches, but there is a better way to kick your bad habits. We're talking about our new sponsor Fume, who might have the product just for you. Fume is an innovative, award-winning flavor device. What does that mean? Well, instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all natural, delicious flavors. Your Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial, and it's also been designed with a lot of moving parts and magnets to keep your fingers busy, which is also good for de-stressing as well. All you got to do is pop it open, choose your flavor, put your core inside your tube, and slide it back in. You don't even need to charge it. There are no electronics involved. As you can see, there's no vapor, it's just flavored air. Tastes good. If you do have one of those bad habits, this thing could be a genuine replacer for you. It's just controlling your breathing with some natural flavors. Honestly, I wasn't really sure what to expect when I first tried it, especially because there's no vapor that comes out of it. It's a little strange at first. Stopping a bad habit is something that we all put off because it's hard, but with Fume, you can find yourself a nice, easy way to do it. Fume has served over 150,000 customers, and they've produced thousands of success stories, and there's no reason why you can't make the switch either. Scan the QR code and use the code MMA ONPOINT, and you'll get yourself 10% off when you pick up the Journey Pack today. That's tryfum.com and use the code MMA ONPOINT to save yourself an additional 10%. All right, back to the video. Thank you to all our channel Hall of Famers. Cheers for all the support, guys. And these are times taunting fighters got KO'd. So there's obviously a lot of different ways that you might taunt your opponent, and I'm going to show you a bunch of different examples today. I've broken them down into different categories, so we have a lot to look at. So settle on in, grab your popcorn, and get ready to watch a bunch of fighters get their comeuppance. Just remember as well, we're talking about taunting today. Wagging your finger, making a stupid face, trying to be overly intimidating, whatever it is, it's not trash talking, so let's not get this one confused. Alright, let's start with the weigh-ins. So before both fighters even get a chance to put their hands on each other inside of the cage, they've got to make weight, and we have seen this and the stare down that follows as a perfect opportunity for a bunch of fighters to taunt their opponent. Why don't we start with a bit of a classic one, Ioane and Jacek against Rose Namajunas. You know, JJ did pretty much everything she could to get in the head of Rose.
She's been a multiple-time world Muay Thai champion, and she just knows how to fuck with people.
Yeah.
She was getting in Rose's face, calling herself the boogie woman, trying all manner of intimidating tactics, but none of it worked. And when it came to the fight, Rose came out the gate and made short work of her, knocking her out in the first round. Here's one you probably don't know that went down at Octagon MMA. Co-main event was Ion Tabercianu versus Vlasto Chepo. Chepo had won a bunch of fights already at Octagon, but Ion brought a banana to the weigh-ins and pointed it right at Vlasto, trying to be the first guy to take him out in the promotion.
Is that a banana? Most dangerous weapon in Mario Kart.
Ion did well, but Vlasto rallied late in the fight and managed to score the knockout over the Banana Warrior. I can't not mention the stare down you've probably all seen between Julian Wallace and Ben Wen. Basically, that guy with all the tattoos who tries to intimidate Ben, who looks like the maths kid at school. Julian was the promotion's champion at Nitro, and this was pre-Ben's UFC career, but it took him just 24 seconds to shut the lights out on this scary opponent. Or maybe not so scary. If you were there as saw it, it's probably impossible to forget that face Fabricio Verdum kept making when he was defending his UFC title against Stipe Miocic. It was kind of like a troll smile. He put it on a bunch of masks, and he did it at the weigh-ins pretty much every chance he could, even walking out before the fight. He even tried to fill the whole arena with them, but they got banned. But that didn't stop Stipe from coming out in the first round and taking revenge, getting a knockout. Unknown PFL star Sadibou C also knocked out Davey one more round back in Sweden in 2016. He had given Sadibou the middle finger during the weigh-ins, but when it came to the fight, well, he got himself knocked out by the Swede. I should also mention there's a bunch of guys like Melvin Gallard, who taunted a lot of opponents at weigh-ins, Michel Pereira's opponent Zalim Imadaev, who did the same thing. All these guys taunted them,
Oh, he just slapped him, Johnny just slapped him.
but ended up getting submitted. I know some of you might have thought about those guys, but we're just sticking to knockouts today. Right, let's move on to in-cage stare downs. This is another place we've seen a bunch of taunting happens when the fighters actually go face to face for a brief moment before the fight, which is not always the case in the UFC. It depends if it's a main event, but it has made for some great moments. Why don't we just start with that time the Texas Crazy Horse Heath Herring was competing over in Japan and in Pride. He had no problems in 5 years really and put on a ton of good fights, but at the 2005 New Year's show, Yoshihiro Nakao gave him a New Year's kiss during the stare down and Heath punched him unconscious. I mean, that taunt definitely backfired, and in case you were wondering, Herring is not a homosexual.
I'm not gay. Yeah. It's illegal. Illegal act. I didn't touch him. I stood there and he tried to kiss me on the lips like a homosexual.
Another really famous one is when Shogun Rua's brother Murillo went up against Tony Bonello. This happened in the later part of Ninja's career after his time in Pride, and it went down in Hawaii in Elite XC. Tony was a 16-0 Australian Jiu-Jitsu black belt and fancied himself a submission whiz. Not sure why he decided that screaming F you in Ninja's face before the fight was a good idea. And it definitely backfired when Rua beat the crap out of him for almost the whole fight.
Be careful what you ask for.
Some people might also remember the rise of Irishman James Gallagher. He got a lot of shtick early on in his career when he was being compared to Conor McGregor. James was always a pretty confident guy and he wasn't afraid to show it, and going into a really tough fight against the equally young and talented Ricky Bandejas, well, he took it to another level, talking shit but also gesturing at just about every chance he had before the fight, and then in the cage going right up to his face and raising his arms in victory. It was a lot. Ricky put on a great performance though and landed an awesome finishing sequence and a knockout in revenge.
Here comes! It's over! Oh! What the hell? Shawn Michaels, the super kick, the rock! What? My God! What did we just see?
Another fun one to mention is James Thompson when he was over in Pride and took on Fedor's brother Alexander Emelianenko. This was James' first fight outside of the UK, first time in Pride obviously as well, and he was perfect for him, just a giant scary looking guy.
Whoa, look at him.
He played the part as well, banging his gloves together menacingly before the fight started and running at Alex, who knocked him out in 11 seconds. Kind of made his own stare down in that one, and honestly it's a mental fight.
I was looking tough and it went wrong.
Charles Crazy Horse Bennett is someone who, whenever he got given a stare down, usually just used it as a chance to talk shit to the camera, taunt his opponent, imitate a dog, you know, whatever he wanted. And I kind of just have to give him a mention here because he did a lot of crazy taunts to the camera and to his opponents in those stare downs in Pride, although he usually ended up being submitted, not KO'd, but we've got more on Crazy Horse later. Alright, let's move on to some delayed karma. So sometimes the trash talk or the rivalry between two fighters gets to the point that, you know, during the fight one of them is prepared to continue trash talking or, you know, carry on taunting. Now, if you thought you were going to look a bit stupid after doing something at the weigh-ins and then get knocked out, well, taunting during the actual fight is only going to make things worse. Great example to start is when the Brazilian Eric Silva took on Nordine Taleb. Eric had already had a bunch of UFC fights at this point and kind of had a hit and miss reputation, but had proved he could knock people out. Things were usually quite respectful with Eric, but during the fight with Nordine, Silva ended up on his back and the Canadian let him up. Eric held out his hand to bump him and then immediately tried to knock his head off. One round later though, Taleb got payback in the form of a knockout. Nate Diaz is always a guy who isn't afraid to give his opponents the finger. In fact, both Diaz brothers have taunted their opponents in a bunch of fights, before, during and after, and while they may have lost some of those fights, Nick has never been knocked out, and Nate, well, it only happened one time against Josh Thompson. That also happened to be a fight that Nate decided to taunt throughout, trying to get the punk to engage him while he played possum and the crowd booed, but he stayed focused and waited for the right moment to strike, which ended up in a TKO victory for Josh. Sometimes it's a case of being a bit overconfident through the fight as well, and we saw that when veteran Rafael Natal took on Andrew Craig. Natal had just got a streak going in the UFC and must have been really feeling himself, as he basically fought the entire fight with a big smile on his face. And during the second round, after nearly finishing Craig, he seemed to think the fight was in the bag and started taunting the tired Andrew. His cocky attitude continued until there were just 10 seconds left in the round, and Craig landed a perfect head kick for some perfect payback. And a great but old school example that happened on The Ultimate Fighter. During the highest rated season with the heavyweights, Roy Nelson came in as the favourite to win because he'd been the IFL champion, which is actually a pretty big deal. But you know, at first glance, no one thinks the big country guy was actually going to win, not when you had a bunch of other massive heavyweights on the show. James McSweeney made it to the semi-finals where he matched off against Roy, and I don't think he really took Nelson that seriously either. After a big exchange trade early on, James started calling Roy on, and then he pointed at his chin and asked Big Country to hit him, and Roy did. and after that he took him down and got the TKO finish.
He was like this, James was moving, he was like this for a minute.
And one last one here as well. Who remembers that crazy fight between Drew Dober and Rafael Alves? The Brazilian had a reputation for just swinging for the fences and was clearly super athletic. At the end of the second round, he just put his back against the cage and showed some insane head movement, and he was just calling Drew on. Third round though, Rafael got up against the cage again, and this time Drew went to the body and was able to finish him. Alright, let's move on to That Didn't Hurt taunts. Alright, so kind of a classic one here, and it seems actually pretty sensible when you think about it. If you're in a fight with someone and they punch you in the face, pretending that it didn't hurt could be a great way to get under their skin, or make them think twice about their decision to even attempt to do that in the first place. One of the first great early examples of this kind of taunt was when Matt Wyman took on Spencer Fisher. Matt had taken this fight on late notice to get into the UFC and would actually be invited to join the Ultimate Fighter 5 cast after this fight, even if perhaps he didn't seem to take it that seriously. Things had just started to get exciting after Spencer landed a right hand, but Matt shook his head and then wagged his finger in the air to say, "No, it didn't hurt me," and then Fisher immediately knocked him out with a flying knee. The first ever in UFC history. It was pretty spectacular and just bad timing on the taunt, I guess, man. Damn. Before the future light heavyweight title challenger Dominic Reyes got to the UFC, he was tearing things up on the regional scene in the US. His last fight went down in LFA against a guy called Jordan Powell. Things got off to a fast pace with the Dominator trying to end things quickly. He blew past Jordan with a right hand, but the guy immediately shook his head to tell him, "Nah, that didn't hurt." Dom responded with a head kick, which definitely did. And yeah, it was the big kibosh, eh lads?
Oh, the big kibosh!
And there's also this back and forth with these two unknown guys at Rogue fights, one with this really weird style. And after a beautifully timed right hand, for some reason the taller guy started slapping his own face. I guess he also wanted to pretend that didn't hurt as well, and just ran into a knockout. Here's one you've probably seen before with a guy who thinks he just turned on God mode, just walking towards his opponent pretending nothing can hurt him, but of course he just gets knocked out. Alright, bring it on taunts. Now, this is possibly the most common kind of taunt in MMA. Maybe because all these fighters watched The Matrix and thought that thing Neo does with his hands was pretty cool, or more likely asking your opponent to bring it on and hit you harder just seems like the most badass thing you could do, and yeah, it's happened a lot in MMA. I think a classic example from the UFC was when Holly Holm took on Betch Kahea. Both girls had been in the title picture, but this was several fights removed. Holly had actually just lost 3 in a row, and you kind of wondered how. She was just undefeated not that long ago, and clearly she was an amazing striker, you know, levels above everybody else, but she just wasn't pulling the trigger anymore. That was until Betch, looking like an anime villain, asked her to bring it on in the third round of their fight, and Holly let rip with a question mark kick immediately. And it was so clean, man. If you've ever sat down to watch a Chris Lieben fight, you'll know that you can never count him out. A couple of times he's looked on the verge of being knocked out and he's come firing back to knock other people out. The same thing happened against Terry Martin. After trading power punches, Terry blasted Chris and lifted his arms as if to say, "What you got?" And that's when it looked like a kill switch had flipped behind the eyes of Lieben and he just zombied forward and KO'd Martin. Chris had some insane fights like this, and yeah, way to get revenge for the taunt, man. A relatively big fight back in the day in Pride was once again Fedor's bro Alexander and a top heavyweight who never made it to the UFC, Sergey Karatanov. He'd done really well in Pride, only losing to Big Nog and up until his last fight, Alistair Overeem. So when they started trading deep into the first round and he called Alex on and told him to give him some more, it seemed pretty cool. But immediately he got smoked with a right hand and just got taken down and TKO'd on the ground with some old school Pride knees.
He's not okay. I know he's saying he's okay. I know he's saying he wants to fight. The ref did a great job stepping in.
Here's another great one that went down at CFFC. Always a good promotion for prospects. Dilshad Zaripov took on Santo Curatolo. Both guys had only one loss on their pro career, and you might know Santo, he got a shot on the Contender Series. Considering Dilshad, though, had won 3 of his 4 wins by first round finish, I guess it wasn't surprising that he started calling on Santo in the second round to start throwing down, and you know, Curatolo did, almost immediately KOing him after he'd asked for it. Over in Russia at ACA, we saw something pretty much exactly the same.
Levan Makashvili, a Georgian, as you can probably tell by his name,
Was a 9-year veteran with an impressive 15-3 record, and he'd been at ACA a few times.
His opponent, Roman Deek, was a newcomer to the promotion.
And no doubt wanted to make a big impression. Levan was doing a great job circling away and staying on the outside, and Roman, who's actually more of a submission guy, was clearly frustrated at the lack of opportunities to punch him in the face, so he screamed at him and told him to come and get him, and then this happened.
Roman calling as we say that.
Yeah, he definitely got the action he wanted though. Let's go back over to the UK for some regional MMA and contenders Norwich.
BJJ black belt Baruch Martin was trying MMA for the first time.
And he was given another debuter in Konrad Jaskovic. Now, after taking a bit of a beating and getting back to his feet, Bruce called him on and immediately got taken out by the newcomer. And it seems Martin was actually pretty surprised about it. And you know, I suppose in some ways you could also say Jorge Masvidal against Kamaru Usman 2 fits in this category as well. After some great exchanges in the second round, Jorge dropped his hands and gave Usman a smile. Looked like he was trying to time that left hook counter and bait Kamaru in, and
of all the superlatives.
okay, we've done that didn't hurt. Let's have a look at that did hurt. For this next couple, let's have a look at a few more rare instances. Pretending something did hurt is a tactic guys have used a lot before to kind of bait your opponent in, but it also can be used as a taunt when you're kind of implying that, you know, your opponent doesn't have any power. Pretty high profile example of this was when Anderson Silva took on the All-American Chris Weidman to defend his middleweight title. At this point in Anderson's career, he pretty much felt untouchable. Sure, he'd always taunted and maybe clowned around in the cage, but against Weidman, it turned out to be a bad idea. The tension had been building, and in the second round, Chris tagged Anderson with a cheeky left hook. Anderson faked being hurt and wobbled around, and Chris followed up with a combination and ended it with another left hook that knocked out the untouchable legend.
My goodness, you can't play games in the octagon.
I guess kinda a crazy example of this is also the first time Ion Kutalaba fought Magomed Ankalaev. Ion kinda ran at Magomed before the fight even started and did the whole throat slice motion
on the way in, but all that got him really was a cuddle. Then during the actual fight, he was also pretending to be hurt really early on and wobbling backwards and forwards, and this one became a controversial stoppage because apparently everyone apart from the ref knew Kutalaba was just trying to taunt him. The ref stopped this one, so it went down as a TKO, which is a knockout loss from taunting, so it should be on this list, even if it was just a very strange moment in the UFC. And after 74 fights, when you thought he was about done, Crazy Horse came back at Gamebred FC 21 and took on a UFC veteran turned MMA lab coach Rob Emerson. Throughout the fight, Charles pretended to be hurt and pretty much pulled out the Drunken Master style. Towards the end though, it was kind of hard to tell if he was just playing around or actually seriously hurt, and Emerson eventually found the KO after about 4 minutes of action.
You realize, all right, you're playing possum. And Rob Smart jumped on him here.
He could tell that one was real.
Taunting during the walkouts. It's not often you see it, but yeah, even during walkouts, some fighters have taunted their opponents and then ended up unconscious for it. You've probably seen the video of Jason Solomon doing the most confident walkout ever. You know, he was 4-0 in the Super Fight League in India at this point, and this was for the vacant title. And if you can't tell, I think he thought he was going to be the champion. Once he actually made it to the cage, he walked right up behind his opponent, Amitesh Shalby, trying to taunt him, and then he came flying out after the bell rang in the first round, only to...
for the welterweight. Oh! He's hurt! He's hurt! He's hurt! He's hurt! He's out!
I mean, for this video, that could not have played out better, but obviously, yeah, that one's going to be hard to live down. You missed me taunts. Alright, well, there's been a lot of times fighters have gone to the old "you missed me" taunt, or, you know, looking like a plane flew by. We've seen that one in fights like Cody Garbrandt versus Dominic Cruz, but, you know, Cody won that one. A good example of when we did see this, though, was when MVP took on the former Bellator champion Douglas Lima. He'd go on to win the belt back after this fight as well, but pre-fight, of course, MVP was doing his whole Venom show thing, which I guess maybe you could count as taunting. The fight was a pretty big deal for Michael though. He was still undefeated and had been beating guys easily for years, and finally was getting a big test in Lima. You could even say MVP's whole style is almost a taunt as well. He's constantly trying to get you to come forward and hit him so he can counter. So yeah, he did end up dropping his hands a lot in this one and shaking his hips about, and after a tense first round, a couple of seconds into the second, Lima swung a leg kick. MVP did the whole "you missed me" and then came forward, dropped his hands a bit again to bait, right as Lima stepped in and landed a knockout blow. Dancing taunts. Alright, and finally we have perhaps the silliest thing to do inside a cage as well, which is to dance in front of your opponent. You know, this ain't a disco, it's a cage fight, but you know, if you're Cody Garbrandt and having a godlike performance, well, it looks pretty great, doesn't it? You could save the dancing for the celebration as well. We know who has the best robot in MMA, but if you're Joe Hardin on a regional MMA show, we get that you're trying to do something viral and make a name for yourself, but it backfired in a big way. Joe was still an amateur when this happened, and he'd had a good run so far, 7-0 at one point, and he went up against the 1-0 Johan Segas at British Challenge MMA, and he probably thought he was far more experienced and better than his opponent and decided to showboat throughout basically the entire fight. I guess play stupid games and win stupid prizes is the phrase. In the third and final round, after again doing some truly insane shit in the cage, he started dancing, and Johan fired a head kick that caught Joe and knocked him unconscious.
You don't do that kind of stuff. Ends up getting paid for it.
That one had to feel good, I tell you. Also, before we go, I feel I have to give a mention to a fighter who, if you spent enough time going down MMA YouTube rabbit holes, you've probably come across Jonathan Ivey. Now, he's made a career out of doing some pretty strange stuff inside the cage, some really strange stuff. In fact, every single taunt you could probably imagine pre-fight at stare downs, and that's even including a few dances as well, and even the praying mantis, which he apparently bangs out on a lot of occasions. Not sure what you'd classify those Dark Souls roles against Ken Shamrock as. Maybe that's dancing, I don't know. He did the look away taunt when fighting Chris Barnett and narrowly avoiding a tornado kick from hell. And as a guy with over 100 fights, it's not surprising that in a bunch of these situations where he was taunting his opponent, he also got knocked out as well. You gotta think at some point he probably would have learned his lesson, but then again, he's just trying to be entertaining, and I'm pretty sure he's happy to do it all over again.
Alright everyone, what a list. That was pretty much every time someone taunted in MMA that I could find, alright? We categorized it for fun today, but if you ever wanted to see a bunch of people getting knocked out doing stupid things, you can watch this video again, can't you? Big shout out to Max Randall for editing this video. I know he worked hard on this one, okay? This was a big video, alright? So definitely go give him some thanks, some appreciation. You can check out his YouTube channel. He's got a place called The Combat Arcade. Thank you as always to all you Hall of Famers for going the extra mile supporting us over here at MMA On Point. There's a bunch of exclusive content you can get access to by joining them. Link is down below, or you can click the button as well. That works. Thank you very much, guys. I've been Bailey and hope you appreciated this one. I had a lot of fun. Now, I'll see you in the next one, and don't do anything stupid if you're in a cage fight.